I don't know how we're going to do it this morning, but we are going to do it. We're going to talk about absolutely everything that is happening in the world of sport, and it's an unbelievable amount of stuff to get through because there are massive concussion stories coming out. Johnny Sexton spoke yesterday about his frustration with the way he has been talked about in the media. There is the ongoing speculation, which is hardening, that Martin O'Neill is now the last remaining candidate for the Stoke job and that he's the number one candidate when it comes to Stoke's perspective. There is the fact that Munster yesterday, their head coach gave his press conference ahead of the Racing game. The Racing game brings up the fact that Donncha Ryan could be playing against Munster. That's the first time that that's happened. And there is a guy who used to play for Racing who's now on Munster's books who could play this weekend, who's fit for the first time this season, who is a drugs cheat. This is Grobler, who was 22 when he tested positive for a breast cancer drug. I mean, as you do, you take breast cancer drugs when you're a man who doesn't have breast cancer. And got popped, served 2 years, went and played for Racing for a year, and now plays for Munster. Hasn't played yet, so hasn't really been that much in the public's mind. We'll talk a bit about that a little bit later on as well. Jim McGuinness is coming back from China, we think, to where? I'm not sure. And there was a bunch of other things that we want to talk about too, including if you were to make an Irish sports documentary, now that we've had a series of good ones, what would be your favourite sports doc? That's what we're talking about. Sexton, Larmour and Health. We're going to talk rugby with Johne Murphy a little bit later on. The Champions Cup 2, the Backpages, and Irish sports documentaries is where we're going to start. I'll run you through the sports news in just a moment, but good morning to you, Owen.
Good morning, Ger. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. So this is basically a rip-off of Kieran Cunningham idea, so good morning to you, Kieran. I hope you're watching. He was like, what other great Irish sports documentaries would you like to see? And various people chimed in with stuff like Liam Brady, Kevin Moore, and they would all be good ones. But for you?
For me, it is a documentary called Blues Brothers, directly taken from the movie because that was the inspiration for Blues Sisters, the documentary, which was a brilliant fly on the wall and great insight into the Dublin ladies All-Ireland quest last year. Do it for the men's team and let's actually get a proper insight. It's never going to happen, obviously. These are documentaries that, for the most part, we're going to chat about now, that will never, ever see the light of day. And I would say Blues Brothers would be the least likely of anything to ever happen. It would be brilliant. Just do exactly what they did for the ladies team and do it for the men's. The insight we got from that documentary was outstanding.
The ladies team, they picked like 4 or 5 of the team and a couple of the backroom teams. So who would be in the Blues Brothers?
Well, Connolly obviously is choice number 1. Cluxton obviously is choice number 2 to see what he actually talks about. Gavin obviously would be choice number 3. Outside of those 3, really, then it's Philly, who you would probably like to see there as well. Like we talk about the Dubs as a boring team when it comes to the media, but straight away there's 4 people there I desperately want to hear from in this documentary. Not people I'd be interested to hear from, 4 people I desperately want to hear from. Of course, we've heard from Philly a good bit, but the other 3 certainly, outside of the Hill 16 podcast, whatever Diarmuid Connolly did a couple of weeks ago, we haven't really heard anything. And people like salivated at the thought that Stephen Cluxton might one day write a book.
I wouldn't recognise the sound of the voice of Connolly and or Cluxton at this point. I mean, you might just about recognise them.
That's actually a very good point. I was actually at a table quiz down at home at the weekend, and it was a voices round. It was a quiz where you could use Google, and it was a voices round, and there was a voice, and he was talking about playing centre forward and playing in full forward sometimes, and we couldn't get it. Nobody in the room seemed to be able to recognise who it was, and it was Diarmuid Connolly.
Yeah.
I was like, Jesus, that's what he sounds like. I think our guess was Paul Flynn or something, but he's a voice you'd certainly recognise. Dean Rocks you'd probably recognise, but who would be that 5th voice in that documentary?
Theo, or the basketball coach.
Mark Ingle, yeah, it'd be very interesting. Probably one of the players though, because J.O. has spoken a good bit around the book. I'm talking about the rarity of voice here. Mark Ingle has done plenty of interviews before he went in with the Jim Gavin setup. I don't know, maybe McCaffrey just for a bit of life. I know we've heard a good bit from him as well when he came back from Africa. He did a lot of interviews.
And his recovery from injury next year, that would be pretty good.
Yeah, like he'd add a different tone to it.
Would you watch it about Kerry? Would you like, as a Kerry man, 100%. To see? You would, yeah.
Like anything like A Year Till Sunday or Blues Sisters, the 2 outstanding GAA documentaries of our time. Anything of that ilk, any GAA team I would watch.
Obviously, Hard Knocks is this American football thing that comes out every year, and it's always about training camp, and it goes through that whole process of training camp where players are getting cut. But the NFL make that with HBO, and they can compel teams to do it. So they say you have to do this. I mean, obviously it's an amateur organisation. You can't compel anybody to do anything in the GAA. But if every year they decided that one of the top teams, one Division 1 team has to agree to have this documentary made about them, and there's like 25 grand for the players pool,
Or why not just make it like contractual that the All-Ireland winners have to do it?
The next year?
Yeah, like we talk about this.
It'll be Dublin every year for like 10 of the next 11 years.
But even just the story of it, like the story of this year, or sorry, story of 17 would be fascinating. The Dermot Connolly thing compared to 2016. What happened in 2016 again? I can't remember. Cluxton talking about getting rattled by those 2 goals by Kerry before half time.
Yeah.
Every year is a different story.
But that's different. That's the straight to the camera piece at the end of the year.
That's the America's game. Yeah, sure. But we talk about the GAA being at a crossroads now and going too corporate. Let's make the most of this. Let's make great documentaries if things are going to go too corporate.
Hung for sheep to the lamb is
Let's
your
get some good content.
Yeah, okay, so I'd like to see a good Sonia O'Sullivan documentary. I think that that career and exactly what happened in Atlanta, everybody's probably calm enough now to be able to talk about the fallout from that. Plus, like, the level of success that she had, that just needs to be talked about. And the people that she was competing against needs to be talked about as well, like Gabriella Jabo and getting into all that kind of stuff. I'd like to see a proper Roy Keane documentary. Like, I'd like to see a proper Saipan documentary at this point where everybody sits down, where you go back to that room where, and it's not like presented by one of those whatevers who would be like, oh, here I am on the scene in Saipan where the music played in the background. It's like, you know, the eerie silence, the wind whistling off the Suicide Cliffs is this like the main tourist attraction in Saipan. That's the name of the tourist attraction. It kind of writes itself at this point, I think. And most of the main characters have probably said something on the records since that you could dig out, even if it's only audio, if it's grainy audio clips. That, like,
even better.
Exactly. So I'd like to see that. There's probably a bunch of GAA ones that you would like to see and getting that culture. And I think Loose Horse are doing great stuff and actually making it okay for people. Like Dermot Connolly on his own, I think a proper Dermot Connolly documentary, like Galvanised, like the I don't know if you remember the Paul Galvin documentary, which everybody, I mean, it was pre-social media, but his skinny jeans seemed to send the country into meltdown. But actually the best part about that documentary for me was that they had player cam on him for the Munster final, and you could just watch, they just followed him around like he was just this kind of ball of perpetual motion. And I think it was Noel O'Leary would have been marking him that day.
Obviously, if it was.
Yeah, so like, and you see the stuff that he actually went through. It completely changes your perception of what an individual battle is like on the field. And if somebody was to do that for Connolly over the course of a season, assuming of course that he plays every game, which hopefully he will next year, I think that would be sensational. But most of all, the documentary that I want to see is Michelle Smith. I think it's time. I think the country needs to see a proper Michelle Smith documentary. And I think there's a bunch of American swimmers who would be interested in contributing to that, who, if anybody out there wants to make that documentary, we can put you in touch with.
A big budget one would
30 for 30.
Yeah, would ideally uncover the information that potentially needs to be uncovered. Who knows? Even just a regular small budget one where there isn't a huge amount of money gone into the journalism that might be required for this to be as explosive as it probably could be. That would still be great. It would still be just, even to some people who aren't familiar with the story, there's a full generation of people,
it's a restatement
myself
of
included, who don't remember it happening at the time. Of course, we've gone back and read and are up to date with what happened, but there's a huge cohort of people who are just like, who is Michelle Smith? What happened in 1996?
Why does it matter?
Why does it matter?
Yeah.
Just kind of touching back very briefly on your point about Galvin and Connolly there, certainly when Galvanised came out, I felt that was vindication for Paul Galvin. Of course I had a bias, and I was like, at last people around the country are seeing what this man is really like. That will be the case with Dermot Connolly.
Yeah.
If people in Dublin feel that there is this complex around Dermot Connolly that he's always portrayed as the villain, a documentary is a great avenue to go down for that to be changed, and not to artificially airbrush out his flaws, but to show that, of course, every human has flaws, but let's show the good side of Dermot Connolly here that obviously exists.
Yeah, you just can't see Jim Gavin agreeing to have an individual documentary made.
Absolutely no chance. This is pure fantasy terms.
Yeah, totally. Any other fantasy documentaries? I mean, I'd like to see a good one in Shergar, like a proper one.
Yeah, it's kind of like stepping outside of the Irish sports documentaries one for a moment. The Keane v Vieira format for Jose versus Conte right now would be amazing. Like, Gabriel Clark would just step back and the boxing gloves would be on.
Yeah. There'd be no gloves, there'd be knuckle dusters.
Probably, yeah.
And knives.
I was going to say knives, but you've gone ahead and said it. I wasn't sure of actually saying it.
A Peaky Blinders style. I was put in mind of the Sopranos episode where Tony goes to see the shrink and she talks to him about the art of war and Sun Tzu. And there's a line in it about if your opponent is choleric in temperament, annoy him. And I was thinking, what is Jose Mourinho doing? Why, like, because he's brought the full force of Antonio Conte's bile and hatred right up to the very forefront of Conte's being. And as you saw yesterday in the press conference, so I don't know if everybody's paying attention to yesterday. Conte did another press conference yesterday ahead of the Arsenal game, and he went at it again and said, he was asked about the LMA intervening. Had the LMA intervened, Antonio, to calm this down? He's like, it's nothing to do with the association. It's nothing to do with the clubs. This is personal. It's him and me, and we're going to see what happens next.
It's amazing. It's like a journalist paid him loads of money to say this. It's like, please give us the next chapter in the story we really want. It's almost like a cutscene before the theme song kicks in The Sopranos. It's like, this is what's going to happen, and it's got to happen now. Boom, credits roll. You're like, oh, I can't wait for the next hour of this.
How long can it last? Like the fixture isn't for weeks and weeks.
I know, but it's going to keep going and going. You've got to keep asking Conte about this, because he's not saying, I don't want to talk about this anymore.
No, he's like, I want to talk more about it.
It's like, here's more petrol.
I've had another thought, actually. This is how I'm going to kill him.
Absolutely. I think this is the week, though, where he can do it, because he's got today and he's got the post-match stuff to really, get some upmanship going on Jose, because he doesn't have this midweek game for the presser. It
all seems to have started around the 4-0 last season, when Conte goes like this to the crowd and says, oh, come on, it's 4-0. And Mourinho, at the end of that, goes and says, look, you're humiliating me. You can do that at 1-0. You can't do it at 4-0, and then walks off. And one of the other Man United backroom team doesn't shake hands with one of the Chelsea team, and that kind of becomes a minor bust up in the tunnel. And then there's nothing for ages. Like, that was it was annoying, but it was grand. The lip readers on Italian TV came out and saw him speaking in Italian, because of course it's Jose, he speaks 5 languages. Did you know Jose speaks 5 languages? I mean, it's a good thing, except he also is a translator. That's all he was, a translator, according to Van Gaal. But that then becomes the next episode, which happens on the touchline when Mourinho kicks a ball in the general direction of Conte, and Conte storms down the touchline at him and is screaming in his face. And
I forgot about
separated. That. And that kind of seemed to be nothing. That was over. It was just blah, 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 blah. The lip reading I've seen of that isn't as conclusive. It seems to be both somebody translating the Italian and also actually he's speaking English. So I'm not sure exactly what was said then. So then Jose just reignites it now this last week by giving out about the Chelsea game, or the Chelsea-Arsenal game at the weekend, out of nowhere.
Yeah. It's talking about reacting like a clown is how he describes Conte. And if there's one thing you want to say about Antonio Conte, do not call him a clown. Do not criticise his passion, because that is what his whole career has been founded on. But you've also got the thing as well, after Chelsea beat United 1-0 before Christmas, November time, October time maybe even, and they failed to shake hands.
Oh, I skipped one. I skipped one, yeah.
It felt to me at the time that was a very small deal, because it had just come off the back of the Mark Hughes and Jose Mourinho thing as well. So there was kind of 2 handshake stories in the space of a week, and I kind of felt that people were pouring a little bit more oxygen into this than was actually needed. Because
turns out handshake stories are absolutely really important.
Turns out this one was very important. Yeah, Conte
spitting in someone's face, not shaking their hands.
In this particular one, it is, because Conte goes storming onto the field to celebrate with his players. Jose is just there, left standing, and then goes down the touchline. I thought it was a small thing, but little was I to know that it would turn into this amazing soap opera that we have to keep this Premier League interesting.
Jose's like drawing these diagrams from no handshake, inciting the Chelsea crowd against me. It's like, okay, this guy is now my number 1 target, and he's trying to hit him with you fix matches.
Is he bored? Is he just like, I need something to do because we're not going to win the Premier League?
I don't know if it's boredom so much as remember we were talking about Wenger feeling alive on the sideline. I think Jose feels alive when this stuff has gone on. I think he's like absolutely up to his full powers. It's like, look at me, look at the chaos. This is what I bring chaos.
Yeah, he does seem to thrive in that sort of environment. I think he's very good at it. I think people are very quick to jump on the Antonio Conte bandwagon here. I'm not so sure. I'm essentially rooting for Antonio Conte.
You're talking yourself out of the Conte side of it. You're talking yourself into Jose. I mean, I can see a little bit of that. I can see that. Conte was involved in something very dodgy. He got banned and served a touchline ban for 4 months, reduced from 10. The court case found him innocent, but courts obviously have a slightly higher standard of proof than sporting stuff. So a team he was involved in, the Siena team, before he joined Juve, did draw a game 2-2 that a player said had been fixed in advance to finish a draw. I mean, that did happen. Everybody accepts that's the truth of what happened. Whether or not the manager knew, or how much the manager knew, that's up for debate. Conte says he didn't know anything. The original case against him was like, well, you were talking about it in the meeting beforehand. So,
but that's all hearsay, and in the court of law, that doesn't exactly stand up.
In the court of law, it didn't stand up, but in the sports court, it did. So, like, it's on the record that he was involved as the manager of that team that drew 2-2. So, you know, sometimes it's better that we talk about things that are in people's past. That might come up again in the newspapers. We'll get to the newspapers in just a minute, but just to run you through the main stories from last night. Obviously, a 2-1 win for Manchester City against Bristol in the Carabao Cup. It was a 92nd minute winner from Sergio Aguero for that one. Martin O'Neill to Stoke is gathering pace after Gary Rowett, the Derby County manager, signed a massive new deal to stay with Derby County. Chelsea and Arsenal tonight is the second semi-final of the Carabao Cup. Arsenal playing their full team, with the exception probably of Peter Cech in goals for that one. Zebo to Racing has been confirmed by Racing, who pulled a bit of a Nike Coutinho on it, and have produced an interview on their website where Zebo's talking about how amazing it's going to be to live in Paris, just days away from him actually being in Paris to play against Racing in the Champions Cup. So perfect timing from Racing with that one in the Mind Games Stakes. And the GAA pre-season continues apace tonight with a whole raft of fixtures in advance of some of the refixed fixtures happening in just 48 hours time. Player welfare, how are you?
We'll have a look at the back pages, and we're going to have a look at the rugby pages to start off this morning, starting with the Irish Examiner, who go truth and fiction. Sexton tackles confusion over concussion criteria. He's featured in a lot of the back pages today. It's also a rugby lead in the Irish Times. Munster and Leinster, kind of the stories there. Let me just show you the back page, or the front page of Sports Wednesday there. Munster braced for ultimate Racing test, and Sexton frustrated at constant emphasis on his head injuries. The Sexton thing, a big story, as I say, this morning.
Yeah, okay, so the Mirror, time to go. Beardsley leave of absence while Toon investigate alleged racism and bullying. This is the ongoing story around Peter Beardsley. Sexton, the headlines I don't need. That's the headline on Michael Scully's piece about that press conference that Johnny Sexton gave. So, tab of the morning to you, Owen.
Top of the morning to you, Ger.
Sex on the brain is the headline on the same piece from the same story rather from Neil O'Riordan. This is their Champions Cup preview, Leinster against Glasgow. Johnny clears up issue is the first of the best headlines in the tabloids this morning, and the second of our best headlines in the tabloids this morning.
The top 3 countdown, really, isn't it?
Well, it's a top 2, Owen, because I didn't actually get my full work done this morning, and I've only got 2. Do we have a third one? Do you have a third one?
No.
Grand, okay. So, tab of the morning to you, number 2 is Seps putting it all on the table. Seps Putin it all on the table.
Amazing. I love it. Anything that can get Vladimir Putin involved in top of the morning to you. So, our brand new shiny slot that's going to definitely survive.
I mean, it was never a secret, but the decision to award Russia the 2018 World Cup was effectively a stitch-up, according to Sepp Blatter, who was involved in the stitch-up.
Really?
He says that they had decided in advance that Eastern Europe, which has never held a World Cup, needed to get the opportunity to hold a World Cup. And luckily, only Russia from Eastern Europe was interested in hosting the World Cup. So he didn't guarantee it to Vladimir Putin. So Putin didn't even show up when the announcement was being made. Whereas the heads of states of all those other countries did show up. Putin, knowing the result, full well was like, I'm staying at home, baby, so I'm going to have my own party back at home.
That is just pure coincidence, and I love how things work out in the end for Sepp Blatter. He deserved that slice of luck that he got there in getting Russia to be the only Eastern European country who somehow had resources to host the World Cup, which is amazing. We're going to move on to the Martin O'Neill story, because that's carried in a lot of the back pages as well this morning. On the back of the Heralds, they're leading with the headline, O'Neill back in the frame. That's after Gary Rowett has essentially pulled out of the race because he signed a new contract with Derby County. It's all yours, Mart. Stoke job is O'Neill's to turn down. That's on the back of the Irish Daily Star. On the back of the Irish Daily Mail, O'Neill poised is the headline. Potter said to offer top job to Ireland coach, says Philip Quinn.
The Indo obviously have an ad on the back of their paper for the new Winston Churchill film, which apparently is getting rave reviews.
I haven't seen it yet. I'll give you my review as soon as I see it. As you know well, I love that era of history.
Big Winston Churchill fan?
Kind of. But we can get into that another day. I'm not going to go into my political leanings were I to be alive in the 1930s, 40s.
Yeah. I mean, needs must, I guess. GAA and HSE share the same problem, the blame game. This is Martin Browney, is effectively the lead story on the back of the Irish Independent today, and the Racing Post, they're previewing the Chelsea-Arsenal game tonight. Knockout blues, Chelsea can pile on cup misery for Arsenal is their story. Mengley and Gettysburg to clash in Saturday thriller. That is Mengley Can is going to go up in Punchestown on Saturday against Gettysburg, and the Racing Post are licking their chops ahead of that one.
And just a very brief look at the UK titles then. On the front of the Guardian Sport, they lead with Glenn Remark Mara's Rooney Rule announcement. We'll get into that in a moment. We've also got a picture there of Sergio Aguero after his late winner against Bristol City last night. And he's also on the front of the Daily Telegraph front page. Advantage Aguero reads the headline. Brave Bristol suffer last-minute blow as Guardiola's men take charge of League Cup semi-final.
Yeah, so there's a couple of other things that we want to talk about. We'll talk about that Rooney Rule story in just a minute on the back of a brilliant interview with Donald McRae. I always mix him up with the guy who punched the head off Ron McGara. I shouldn't do that. They're two very different people. But I do want to talk about this story because in all of the newspapers today, it's reported about Johan van Graan talking about the situation with regards to the Racing game this weekend. But one of the key characters, this is I think an important thing to bring up in advance of this, is the lock that they signed from South Africa, Gerbrandt Grobler. Just have a look at this headline from when he was a 22-year-old from South African newspaper, Western Province. That's what the WP stands for. WP lock test positive. Gerbrandt Grobler has received a 2-year ban after testing positive for an anabolic steroid. The test was done last October during the Currie Cup. When Grobler was informed of the result, he admitted his guilt and made a settlement agreement with the South Africa Institute for Drug-Free Sport, and so he served a 2-year ban for that. The drug was an anabolic steroid, which had been traditionally used for the treatment of breast cancer. So it wasn't something that you take accidentally. It's like something that you decide is going to help you build muscle because he didn't have breast cancer, and so therefore he didn't need to take that drug. This happened, the transfer, he served his 2-year ban, left South Africa, went to Racing in Paris, and then at the end of a 1 year in Racing, ended up being available and signed for Munster. We don't know exactly who signed him for Munster. I presume Rassie Erasmus would have been involved in that signing. You presume it also has to be signed off by, at some point, by the IRFU. And I guess it also has to be signed off on by the chief executive of Munster. But what does it say to anybody in the Munster Academy when a known confessed drug cheat who has served a ban for taking an anabolic steroid is brought into the club? What does it say to the Munster fans, and what do the Munster fans have to say about this? And if you're a sponsor, are you happy to be associated with the fact that this guy is now representing Munster, the province, Irish rugby by extension, and the brands who are associated with it? I just don't think enough of a conversation has been had about this. I don't really feel very comfortable with the fact that Irish rugby has decided that we're going to be the ones who help drug cheats rehabilitate their reputation. I understand that people do a crime, serve the time, and need to be rehabilitated. And so there's a bit of conflict in that aspect of it, that like maybe if he has decided to dedicate his life to helping create a drug-free sport, fair enough, I can see something with that. But we haven't seen that so far from Gerbrandt Grobler. Like, we haven't. All we've seen is he's been injured, in fairness, and hasn't played any meaningful games yet. But I think more of a conversation needs to be had around this. Frankly, I don't think Munster should be spending money rehabilitating drug cheats.
Yeah, I was kind of unaware of what the drug that was taken until I started doing a bit of reading about it this morning. As you say, there was a 2-year served, and you kind of expect almost automatically these days that if somebody's popped, they will claim the accidental route. But as you say, it was breast cancer drug. I think it was drostanolone, which he used. Just doing a very speed reading there. Drostanolone is a drug that is used quite often by people involved in combat sports because it helps you to lose weight quite quickly. It's used in MMA. Anderson Silva has been linked with it before, and just in terms of shedding weight. So it's very useful for that process of things, and it's very odd that a rugby player would use it. The alternative is that it's also used by bodybuilders who are quite open about their steroid use and just want huge muscles. That is obviously the benefit for a rugby player. Its half-life is something between 3 and 10 days. So I'm not sure what the half-life of these sort of anabolic steroids is, but 3 days, if it is 3 days, that seems like a quick enough turnaround if you are taking it between games, if you've got a week off between games, because say in football, it's not something you want to mess around with because you could have a game every 3 or 4 days, whereas if the half-life is only 3 days in rugby, I don't know, I'm going to take that chance if it's going to give me a huge amount of benefit. So, as you say, this is not an accidental thing. This is a very calculated move, you'd suspect, and something which the world, if we're going to really crack down on doping, should have a more stern look at itself for bringing this guy over to Ireland.
Yeah, so just a couple of tweets coming in about this, because we just want to start this conversation and see what people actually think about it, because I don't really feel like Johan van Graan yesterday. And in fairness, it isn't a problem of Johan van Graan's making. It is a problem that he has inherited. He makes the point that this was in the past and that Grobler has served his suspension. And there's not much else Johan van Graan can say. Like, he is somebody who is in his employ, and, you know, I don't know if we actually really know what Johan van Graan really thinks about this. But certainly I think the rest of the Munster hierarchy have a case to answer. Mark Connolly says, I guess he's a Munster Rugby fan, says, I'm not thrilled about it. That said, somewhat mitigating, given that he was 21, 22 at the time, admitted his guilt, served his ban, and does not appear to make excuses for what he did. In that case, I think a second chance is reasonable. What say you? Do you know what? I do think everybody deserves a second chance for most things in life. I'm just not sure when it comes to cheating in sport. Like, this isn't, you know, it's not like he can't go and retrain to become a teacher or a cop or a fireman or a farmer, or it's not like this is going to have an impact on his ability to make a living in other areas of life. He is young enough to retrain. I'm not sure that, like, you should just be able to cheat in sport and go, I've served my 2 years and I'm coming back, and you know what? Look at the size of me now because I did all that cheating in the first place.
Just playing devil's advocate to that a little bit in terms of giving somebody a second chance. Would you give one of the cyclists under the Lance Armstrong regime a second chance because of what they were subject to, because there was no alternative to that? Of course there is alternatives when you're playing rugby, because it's not like if you're trying to keep up, if you're trying to literally win the Tour for Armstrong, of course you have to do it to survive. You don't have to have that on a rugby player, but we don't know the circumstances around a culture that he might have been involved in.
Right, so the culture in the US postal team was obviously that we're doing this to make sure that we're the dominant team and we're going to win. If somebody is in that and comes out of that and puts their hand up and blows whistle, I'm happy to give them a second chance. But if they say, screw that, we won the 7 tours, what are you talking about? Which is what some of them still say. I'm like, okay, you deserve a lifetime ban. Like, it's definitely a case-by-case basis, but it's not that hard to be nuanced about that. Like, it's pretty easy to engage with, okay, the criteria for you having a proper second chance are that you dedicate yourself to helping to clean up the sport and that you explain precisely what happened. In his case, he didn't even have a hearing because he copped to it straight away, which in and of itself is also very interesting. Like, why does a rugby player immediately not have some kind of sense of, okay, I need to defend myself, I need to tell the whole story here? It's like, yeah, okay, I'll take my 2-year ban.
You think there's something fishy about that?
Well, it's interesting you brought up the culture of US Postal. I don't know what the culture of Western Province was.
That's my point.
And I don't know, like, they said that they're going to continue their education process to make sure that players knew what their responsibilities were. But, like, rugby in South Africa has long had question marks about its approach to doping and the amazing growth of certain players over a certain period of time. But it can't just be happening in South African rugby. This can't just be a thing. And so that's why I think that if you are bringing somebody into the Munster setup, the academy players in Munster are going, it's okay for this club to have a drug cheat on their books. And that cannot be a message that you send or are happy to send out to 17-year-olds, to 19-year-olds. And I don't know. I just think it's a serious miscalculation, and I wonder why the hell they've done it.
Exactly. Just like one final point on the whole kind of potential outside influence of this thing. Like, I think one of the most ridiculous portrayals of doping was in Friday Night Lights when Smash Williams was just like, I'm going to go and I'm going to make it to college. And he goes to a gym and he meets this woman who will give him the drugs. And it's like, I am doing this independent of anybody on my high school football team. I'm going to make it, and that's that. And rarely, if you're a 21-year-old like Grobler was when he took the drugs when he got banned, either way, he was a young man. I don't think he was a Smash Williams rocking up to his local gym saying, what drugs have you got for me? Because I'm playing professional rugby now. there has to have been some sort of other influence there, and that's why I'm just hesitant to say Grobler is the only bad egg in the world of rugby.
Yeah, no, I absolutely don't think he is, but you're bringing a bad egg into, or somebody who has certainly confessed to being a bad egg into your environment and your setup, and you're saying we're okay with this. And so that's my view. I'd like to hear what the Munster fans have to say. If you want to get in touch with us this morning, you can tweet us here at Off The Ball, or you can leave comments all day. We'll be looking back if you're getting to this a little bit later on, because I don't know, if you've just joined us, you can listen to the whole show live on offtheball.com. You can always get us on facebook.com/offtheball, and we're also on YouTube. We check the comments every day to see the late arrivals picking up on stuff. But I suspect this is going to be a story that and look, the reason that we didn't talk about it before now is that it wasn't really that material. It's come up this week because he's back playing properly. He's going to be back fit, available after an early season injury. He'd kind of ruled him out to this point, so maybe we're late to the party. Maybe we should have covered it more at the time. Who knows?
Elsewhere in the papers today, we've got, of course, more of the Martin O'Neill stuff. It's going to happen now. It's a done deal almost. It's between himself and Slaven Bilic, it looks like, for the Stoke City job. Gary Rowett out of the running, signed a new contract at Derby County. As we mentioned there a couple of minutes earlier, there's a couple of the papers running with us.
Just to confirm what is going to happen, so it looks like Stoke are going to make an approach to him.
Exactly.
That's what we think. We don't know what O'Neill's feeling about all this is.
So he's gone down to as close to 6-4. To replace Mark Hughes. I know Slaven Bilic was substantially odds on 2 days ago.
Right.
I think they've widened a little bit, but that was with one bookmaker. So I'm not sure what information that bookmaker had with regards to Slaven Bilic. But often if you see one bookmaker doing it, you're like, right, they've obviously got a tip off somewhere. But I think they've widened a little bit. And as I say, it does seem to be just a little bit of a head-to-head. Like Philip Quinn points out that Bilic's candidacy has been weakened because he's taking an extended break, which I presume he's put on the record, but I just must have forgotten about that. Ryan Giggs is not a serious player, apparently, in the race to become manager. To be fair, if you're in a relegation battle, you want O'Neill or you want Bilic, really. And even then, Bilic, you're not quite sure after his recent history in the Premier League. O'Neill is who you're going for if you're one of the top brass at Stoke City. And if it is only until the summer, it's only until the summer, and that's completely fine. I'm starting to think that this whole dual job thing is probably going to happen. He's going to take this job up until June, let Keane do the Ireland job, and then come back to the Ireland falls before September.
Kieran Shannon has a great piece saying that he thinks Roy Keane is ready to manage the international team. I actually also agree with that. That's why I'm pretty relaxed about the whole, if Martin O'Neill goes and decides that now is the time for him to go, that's fair enough. If Martin O'Neill decides to stay, that's fair enough too. I think that like after the 5-1, he probably needs a bit of time away and a bit of a break and a bit of a sense of, I've got unfinished business, or I've taken it as far as I can go. And like rushing that decision when there's no need to at the moment seems pointless.
Absolutely. It's something we're going to keep an eye on. It seems to be developing every day and just edging closer and closer to the end point. The other managerial news, of course, is that Jim McGuinness is leaving his position as assistant coach to that Chinese club, which I just forgotten there for the last moment. He's left Roger Schmidt's backroom team and is returning to Europe.
Beijing.
In Beijing, of course.
Yeah, it's the Beijing team.
Of course. The Beijing outfit.
Yeah, so let's bring you some reaction from that last night. The news broke, obviously, I think in the middle of the show, that McGuinness was leaving his role to Roger Schmidt at Beijing, and he's going to return to Europe. Here's what Kevin Kilban had to say about it on last night's show. Kevin never really quite bought into McGuinness's football credentials.
Spoke about him, haven't we? Spoke about him in the past ourselves.
You sure have.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, no, it's a surprise. It's slightly surprising given the fact is that he was going out there to gain his experience in football and soccer, wasn't he? So I think in general, yeah, it's quite surprising, but we'll see.
John Fogarty in the Examiner.
We'll see where his next chapter is going to take him.
John Fogarty in the Examiner mentioned family reasons. I presume it's obviously a huge toll.
He's got a young family as well, hasn't he? Yeah.
I'm off to China for however long is obviously going to be difficult. He did say he's looking forward to a new chapter in Europe. I see Gary Rowett signed a new deal at Derby.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, if Martin O'Neill goes to Stoke,
next Ireland manager is Jim McGuinness.
would you go in as his number 2? Would you call him Gaffer?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So we'll see what Jim McGuinness does next. It
will be interesting, won't it? It will be interesting.
Well, I mean,
I'm not being funny. There must be a load of Donegal fans thinking,
Jim,
any chance?
Jim,
any chance? We've got the Messiah back.
I know you're very sceptical, and I can appreciate why McGuinness's chance of doing something in the game. I'm more so on the other side of the coin. I really do think this guy's special. I could blow up my face, of course, and it'll be difficult for him to convince football people to accept him.
Don't take the piss now with the football people. I you know I take the piss with that. But my problem, my only problem with it, I just think.
Remind me.
No. The problem being, it's almost the fact is it's not necessarily going back to basics, coaching a team at junior level, under 14 level, under 15 level, coaching teams all the way through. That's not what he's... And
he's operating at an artificially higher level than he should be.
How can he be ahead of Stephen Kenny? How can he be ahead of John Caulfield? And that was me maybe underlying argument from it. How can he be? Simply, he can't be.
Marketing and branding. Or maybe he's just better. Who knows? That's Kev last night speaking about the Jim McGuinness situation. We will await developments in the McGuinness situation with bated breath. Now, go on.
He's a very quick learner, Jim McGuinness. Like, we know that for a fact, even just from his own educational background. And Dermot Desmond obviously gave him the leg up that maybe he wasn't deserving of at Celtic. And maybe he just learned incredibly quickly. Maybe he is better at a better place to get a job under the likes of Roger Schmidt all around the world.
Could the Celtic job be coming up at any point soon?
Probably. Like, Roger's stock's quite high, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not going to get any higher.
No, I don't think he's first team manager ready for a top team that could potentially be a Champions League group stage team. So I don't think so.
All right. Good morning, Cahair O'Kane from the Irish News. How are you doing?
Morning, lads. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. There's a bunch of things we wanted to talk to you about. We may as well get your view on what the hell's going on with Jim McGuinness before we start talking about commercialisation in the GAA. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, funny, I was chatting to Jim about a year ago when he was, or a wee bit over, when he was still at Celtic, and the one thing I could be sure of is that he doesn't really have any intention to go back into the GAA at this stage. He was kind of coy on exactly where he saw his future, but it was certainly in the line of soccer. He was continuing doing his coaching badges, and he's heading down that line. I mean, he likes his German football, so I'd say he'd love to end up there, but I mean, who knows whether he wants to go back into a backroom. Obviously, he was over development squads at Celtic. He'd maybe like something closer to the more permanent to the first team at wherever he goes. But as you say, as you boys are, I'd be a fan as well. I think he has the potential to go on and do what he wants.
Yeah, totally. Like it's just mapping out that career properly and making sure, because football, if you fail at one job, you very rarely get the opportunity to prove that you've learned from it, and got to be very careful now.
Yeah, he's probably gone down a path that maybe a lot of the Premier League managers and the high-profile managers don't go. And you know, you mentioned the like Ryan Giggs there. You know, stepping pretty much. I know he did his coaching badges, but stepping pretty much straight out of professional football and trying to jump in feet first into a kind of high-profile job. And while he's been around the game, it is a different game as well. And McGuinness's path is maybe a safer route for particularly for somebody in his position who doesn't have a reputation or a name within the game to build his way up.
Cahair, the reason that we had booked you was because we wanted to talk to you about exactly what's happening with the GAA at the moment. It's that time of the year where we do get a bit of opportunity not to talk so much about the games and patterns of play and what players are potential players of the year, but actually about the nuts and bolts of the future of the organisation. And it was interesting that in the middle of the day yesterday, a clarification was issued by Croke Park that the Director General's job will not now require a third level business qualification, and that the deadline had been extended, because it had seemed that this was much remarked upon by various people, suggesting that this is a clear signal that the Director General's job will be to maximise the potential returns for the GAA. A lot of people actually will think, well, duh, of course that's going to be his job, but for many people within the GAA, they saw this as a continued sign that actually this is becoming something which is away from the core ideals of the organisation. So our timing was good.
Well, that's absolutely how it looked. When you put a business degree on that as an absolute must, it just becomes, you know, it's inevitable that people are going to look at it that way. There's no other way to look at it than to see that this is all about, you know, working in business. Basically, you're not heading an amateur sporting organisation where the focus is getting the club players as many games as you can, or, you know, ensuring the balance is right between club and county, or any of those things that the kind of the grassroots call out for and are frustrated by, but that it's very much about, you know, maximising the profit, maximising the income, the revenue from sponsorship, advertising, whatever it is that they're doing. and it probably didn't look good, and there was a bit of hoo-ha over it. It nearly looked worse than yesterday to renege on it, and they say, well, actually, you know, lads, we've changed our minds here. We actually don't need that anymore. I don't know why they've decided. Maybe say lack of application on it, or what the reason would be behind it. But it seemed a strange move and strange timing.
Cahair, what do you think is the most important attribute that a potential candidate for the Director General's job should have?
I mean, there's so many attributes. I mean, there's no doubt. Like, Pádraig Duffy takes a lot of flack. But anybody that's been close to him and anybody that knows him on a personal level, knows the work that he's done there, would absolutely agree that he is a GAA man. I mean, he would tell himself about his own sons playing club football and that background, and he probably got a raw deal in one sense, but there's no doubt that he did facilitate and go down the line that maybe the rest of the organisation at that level wanted to go down. And he, as a Director General, you might be the most powerful man in the GAA, but you're still kind of powerless in the sense that you still, as he saw with the Super 8, you still have to get things through Congress in order to make a change. So no matter how good you are, it's still a difficult job. In terms of the main attribute that you need, I mean, that such a wide ranging thing that you know, you would want somebody that has the very, very best interests of the whole membership of the GAA. That, I think that's maybe it, because at the minute the interest seems to be towards the 2% that play inter-county football, and the rest are just kind of left to their own devices. And you know, given the club as a bedrock line every so often, and then everything's great again. But it's in the reality, it's far from great at the minute. And
you were writing about this yesterday, and just explain to us how you think Trevor England, the former Ireland rugby international, comes into relevance in all this, will you?
I will. I met Trevor about a year ago, and he played his rugby for Ballymena, Ulster, and Ireland in the 80s. Capped 31 times for Ireland, and at that time it was just pre-professionals, you know, in rugby. And at that time, the players still played for their club, not just their province. You know, since obviously that's all stopped since the centralised contracts there. But he spoke about playing in Cardiff Arms Park, in a packed Cardiff Arms Park on a Saturday, and then going out with Ballymena on a Tuesday night at 6:30, and a few thousand been there, and they were the attraction. Though, you know, those international players, both for spectators going to watch it and for the other players to play against them. It was such a huge attraction, but that completely died away with professionalism. And now, I mean, I was getting testimony from left, right and centre on Twitter last night about club rugby and the state of it, about, you know, how just attendances and the interest in the game has fallen away to nothing. And that has, you know, it's all right to talk about attendances and interest, but the knock-on result has been participation levels, because clubs that had 9 and 10 teams are now down to having 2 and 3 adult teams, which, you know, tells you all you need to know. And the GAA clubs don't have the luxury, never had the luxury of 10 teams. They're picking from much smaller catchment areas. It's by and large a struggle for most clubs to put out a senior and reserve team. Some will be lucky to have a thirds team, but that's the absolute limit. And so if your participation levels drop there, then you're really in bother. So
you see that your case is that there's this very strong similarity between what happened there with the professionalism and the elite tier of rugby basically taking most of the attention and the attendance is away with what's going on in GAA. Is there any way to fix that? Like, because there is a case to be made that participation levels at youth, the nursery levels in rugby in particular, have started to grow as the superstar rugby players and the marketing around that starts to filter into the kids, and that maybe in 10-15 years time those adult teams start to come back up. That's that cycle that they've been through, and we haven't quite reached the end of that. Is there any way that we can somehow learn some lessons from what rugby did and short circuits? If there is a good end for rugby, maybe, I don't know, maybe there isn't, maybe that's just the end of the club game entirely, but is there any way that can be avoided in GAA?
I think GAA is probably on a similar path. I don't know that they would learn from rugby as such, because their participation levels at underage, you know, your cool camps, your under 14, there's more fellas playing football and hurling and camogie at that age than ever have been. So it's not the problem at that age as such, but when you get to minor level, the drop off is continuing to grow. Fellas are dropping more and more away at that age than ever. So trying to fix it. I mean, you can fix the issue that I'm talking about without going back on inter-county football in some way, because players just, you see. I mean, I just see it up here that, all right, I'm from Derry. The example of Derry is not too bad. The players would play maybe 10 or 11 of the 15 senior club games in the year. The same in Tyrone, which isn't the worst. But then you have the like of Armagh beside us there, where the clubs there kind of accept that they mightn't see their players at all through the club season, until championship time. They mightn't see them for the club league. They might play 2 or 3 games at most, but that model has come from, I remember being at the event in Dublin last year or 2 years ago and asking Johnny Cooper how many club games he had played that year, and he wasn't sure, but he said it might have been 4. And that's the model. Because Dublin are winning everything, naturally the neighbours are looking in over the fence and saying, well, there's the model. We can't have fellas playing club football if we want to win All Irelands. And I mean, how you stop the top teams doing it when they're so successful, I don't know. How you stop the middle tier counties copying them, I don't know. So it's basically down to I would say it does come a lot down to the players having a bit of scruples about themselves and saying, look, I'm playing from a club.
But do you not think the club game in GAA as opposed to rugby will be protected by the fact that the pathway into becoming an inter-county GAA player is still via the club, whereas in rugby the pathway is into a school and then into an academy, and you can completely bypass the club game?
Well, it is and it isn't. There is still that opportunity for you to come through your club, for you to get all your coaching up to senior level, be pulled into a county panel at 21 or 22 and have come that path. But what we're seeing more and more of now is that it's gone the rugby model as well. Like I have a letter in front of me that the Tyrone clubs were sent at the start of 2017 about their academy, and basically saying, look, we have to run minor and under 17 squads together, and in not so many words, the clubs won't see them. They won't be training with you, they won't be playing with you. As long we'll manage their training loads, and you can come and have a look and see what they're doing. But to all intents and purposes, they're going to be academy players until the academy season's finished, and then they can go back and play whatever club football is left. And that was at under 17 level. That is filtering down slowly, surely, and you see the vast majority of inter-county players now have come through those development squads that kicked in maybe 10 or 12 years ago, and the age groups for those development squads is decreasing all the time as well. You're now down to under 13s, whereas a few years ago under 16 might have been the youngest, but you're getting a new age grade and it's it's just becoming a race to see who can get the players and the youngest. Like Michael Calvin's documentary, the other night they're talking about signing players at no age, and that's the way the GAA is kind of heading. And I mean, nobody seems to want to really stop it.
So you ban development squads like under the age of 17? Is that like one immediate step that could fix this, or begin to fix it as part of a massive overall package?
Well, I've written about this a few times, like about that development squads to me aren't the best use of finances and resources that county boards could have. They're playing money into coaches at development squad level. They're playing money into feeding these lads, giving them their gear, all the rest of this, and this applies from even your senior county minor under 21 and then down 17, 16, 15. You're spending into millions on it. And I think if county boards looked at it, and there's bound to be money that you can take out of that, abandon your development squads to a point, or have a much smaller effort at it. And what you do, you hire more coaches. You spend that money, hire more coaches. You put them in through your clubs. You coach the club coaches. You don't necessarily coach the players. You coach the coaches so that you are raising the base level. So the guy come from a very small junior club with maybe 100 members, and our coaches are the best fellas in the world. but they, like every coach, they could do a wee bit of upskilling.
Can I ask you about that? Right? Would there, if there was a bunch of full-time professional coaches employed by the GAA, would there be resentment towards those full-time professionals within the organisation? Like if there were even more of them, if they started to filter down, because there is this sense that like managers are getting paid under the table. Di Regan called it a cancer on the show at the weekend, and you can sense that beginning to rise. But would full-time professional coaches who are all getting paid centrally by the GAA or by the county boards, would that piss people off?
Well, I certainly, it probably could in the long run, but in terms of what's happening now, like I certainly wouldn't have the same issue with a skilled fella who's maybe gone and done his sports science course, knows what he's talking about, knows his game, and has been paid a wage, instead of some fella that, you know, is taking £250 off a club for a week, landing up to training on Tuesday, Thursday night, telling them to run laps, not knowing why fellas pull their hamstring, not knowing why, they're not experts in their field in a sense, and I think experts would be so much more acceptable than what's the average man on the club circuit that is, that's sucking so much money out of it.
Cahair, but like just taking all that into account, and say if, and I know what's happening in certain counties at the moment, that there are the nurturing of former county players and developing them as coaches, but ultimately is that not towards the ultimate end goal and end benefit of the county team? I'm just struggling to see here how the benefit of coaches and the upskilling of coaches and the professionalism of coaches will actually benefit the club player.
You're right in the sense of the way things are at the minute. It would be ultimately to the benefit of the county team. And the thing, people throw it at Brawley or whatever. People think that you have a problem with inter-county football, full stop. Whereas, nobody has a problem with inter-county football as long as it's kept in moderation. And at the minute, it has gone far beyond moderation. It's out of the stratosphere of moderation. And I take your point. You're 100% right that unless you roll way back from what they're doing at the minute, then ultimately the benefit, you can upskill coaches and you'll bring through better players from smaller clubs, and you'll have a bigger base of players. But the better players will still end up in a county panel that are training 5 nights a week and aren't seen by their clubs. So it's not, that in itself is not the answer or the solution to everything. But there's a lot of fragments of it that need fixed.
Cahair, great stuff. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Cheers.
All right, thanks, lads.
It's Cahair O'Kane from the Irish News. Always writes really thoughtful stuff about this. Always worth digging out his columns, and he's a good follow on Twitter as well. I think it's important to have these conversations around the appointment of the Director General, and then it's important to have those conversations with the next Director General. And it's just important that the whole organisation thinks, like, strategically, where are we, so that you don't accidentally sleepwalk into either a split or some kind of codifying of, well, the top 8 are always going to be the top 8. Like, there might be a top 10, and maybe the Super 8 becomes a Super 12, and that's where we stop. Because that's very possible, and it will also result in an amazing tournament. Yeah. But maybe that's not all they need.
Yeah, I think the problem here, and I think it's just worth pointing out again what Cahair is saying here, that nobody is anti-inter-county football. The problem is that there's a gap there. It's too big a gap at the moment between that and the rights of the club player, and it's widening. And even when you talk about the injustices in the strong versus the weak and the Super 8s, because of the Super 8s, that's widening. Because of success, that's widening. If you're a successful inter-county team, you're going to get more benefits. You're going to get better, in some cases, better jobs, better cars. You're going to love the fact that you're an inter-county player more. Yeah. And if you're a weaker county, you're going to hate being an inter-county player more. Joe Sheridan said you would detest it, and that widens the gap further. But just then, like that last question I put to Cahair O'Kane, and even just kind of looking at the minor teams that Kerry have produced over the last couple of years, like there's been a big impetus on taking former players and turning them into great coaches as well, because they've played at the very top level. There's obviously a golden generation of footballers who've played this century, and they've developed some of the best development squads that the county's ever seen. But who's winning as a result of that? That's widening the gap a little bit further as well. If development squads are applied in the game, then I think that is widening the gap further. Okay, it is a tricky enough situation to get to the bottom of in a 15-minute conversation, so we'll keep talking about it. But anyway, as ever, if you want to get in touch with us, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or Periscope. You can just tweet us at Off The Ball for that now. Let's see what Johnny Sexton had to say about the unstoppable juggernaut that is the hype train around Jordan Larmour.
I'm not too sure, to be honest. I think, look, you got to just go on what we've seen, and he's been outstanding for us so far every time he's played. I'd seen him a little bit in the Six Nations last year, or the year before, last year playing for Ireland, and I thought he was outstanding. But again, you kind of take that as it is, and it wasn't until this year I saw him in a Leinster jersey in the summer against Gloucester in Templeville Road, and he stood out a mile that day, and he stood out since. So look, it's not up to me whether he plays or doesn't play. I just think he's been very impressive so far. And look, when you come on, when you play international rugby, no matter what position you play in, I suppose your weaknesses can be exposed because it's such a high pressurised environment. It's tough. It's like international rugby. There's no weaknesses in opposition. You've got to try and sort of force weaknesses out of them. It's tough going. So all of us have learned that the hard way. So look, like I said, he's been very impressive for us so far. He's been in Irish camps before as a 19-year-old and impressed there as well. I think the first person that ever mentioned Jordan Larmour to me and I hadn't heard of him was Joe. So, I'm sure he's a big fan of him. But again, there's lots of other guys in this position that are, very good as well. So it'll be up to Joe, and I hope for him that he does get in because he's been outstanding for us. From what I've seen, is he played against international players at the weekend. He played against international players against Munster, and he stood out. So, but the coaches will, look at his game probably more closely than I would look at it. So again, it'll be up to them, but he's been very, very impressive against top quality, against the back three of, guys like Piatow. So he's world class, and Jordan, looked pretty good as well against him. So
yeah, ringing endorsement there from Johnny Sexton, but key bit of nugget of information in the middle of that.
Yeah, that Joe Schmidt was the man who told Johnny Sexton about Jordan Larmour.
So Lee might get in.
I think that's very interesting that they have conversations about the next batch of young players coming through, that Schmidt and Sexton have those conversations. It is a nugget. But I suppose because we get so little, we don't actually know the inner workings of Joe Schmidt and his interactions with players that well.
No, for sure. Johne Murphy, good morning to you. How you doing?
Morning, good yourselves.
How excited are you about this Jordan Larmour hype train that now at this point looks like maybe he might get at least inclusion in the squad, and who knows, once you're in the squad, who knows what might happen for the Six Nations?
I think he has the raw attributes to be, a top-class player. It's just throwing him in the melting pot and see how he reacts. I'm unsure Joe will probably do that in this Six Nations, but it's certainly something that he's definitely going to be on target over the next kind of 6 to 9 months, be it during the summer tour or in the autumn internationals. But he certainly has something different that other people don't have, and it's that acceleration, and it's the ability to step at full pace. You saw what he did to Darren Cave. Darren Cave defensively is he's an international. He's an excellent defending 13, and he turned him inside out twice in the space of half a second. You don't see that very often. So those moments, I think, for him to be included in those, to probably push him for involvement in the Six Nations. You look at the tackle on Andrew Conway that was missed down in Munster. You look at those things. If he makes that tackle and his defence is 100%, then yeah, you're going, this guy needs to be included. He needs to be. But it's those kind of moments that, if he sticks on Andrew there, or even slows him down for, recovering defence to jump on him, then you're thinking, yeah, this guy has it. It's just those tiny moments that, if he solves them, then yeah, he's certainly warranted inclusion.
Because the thing is, from Saturday night's performance, is not just the rising stock of Jordan Larmour. Some people now think that Jacob Stockdale's position might be under question, but it would be interesting to think what would happen if Jordan Larmour was in Jacob Stockdale's position on Saturday night and Stockdale was in Larmour's position. You'd suspect that things would be very different given the quality of the packs that were in front of each of them.
I think Stockdale has had a couple of moments that he wouldn't be overly happy about, especially defensively, but he has had his standout moments in the games over the last 2 or 3 weeks. He hasn't performed probably to the level he was at during the autumn internationals, but as you say, that's probably because he's been on the back foot, been on a team on the back foot. But he still has had his attacking moments where he's created stuff, in Europe and Harlequins. He kind of, the back-to-backs, he kind of led the show there, himself. And, a couple of the guys in the pack, they really led from the front. So I think it is a bit like that. But, Joe's still not going to like when he gets barreled over by the prop on the edge. I think those things are, he needs to just slow him down there. But yeah, I think you're probably right. The fact that he's on the back foot the last kind of 2-3 weeks has led himself that he hasn't been able to have even more standout moments than he has had.
Larmour gets in the Six Nations squad at least. You bring him in to have that experience, even if you're not going to give him any game time, or do you kind of say go off and play the 2 Pro 14 games in the meantime?
I think it's probably interesting from Johnny's audio there that he's been in already, and he's been in and around the squad, very similar to how Ringrose was for a couple of years. So I'd say no matter what happens, whether he's included in the squad or whether it's publicised or not, he is going to be in Carton. He's going to be learning how they run moves, and then he might be released to play at the weekends. But I'd say with everything that's going on, Joe probably would find himself under a bit of pressure to include him in the greater squad, so that the media at least get kind of what they want. So it can create pressure at times. What the media is saying, it does have a slight influence, I would think. So I'd say he's probably, he's a good bet to be in the greater squad. But I'd say he's 100% going to be in and out of Carton throughout the 8-week period, no matter what.
All right, I want to move on to this Gerbrand Grobler conversation. Obviously, this probably should have been an issue 6 months ago, but Grobler hasn't really played for Munster in any matches of any significance. He is available for this weekend, although it's unlikely that he's going to be pitched in the Champions Cup match because it's such a big game against Racing in Paris. And I just wanted to know what you would think as a professional rugby player if somebody who had served a drugs ban arrived into the changing room. Is there any sense that there's something a bit off about this, or is that just that's just us on the outside, that it's a completely different environment in professional sports?
When I read it this morning, I was kind of, I didn't really know what to think. There's kind of, like anything, there's this grey area around. There's not a grey area around that he took it, but the reasons and all that kind of stuff. As you say, I'm very surprised that it hasn't been out there before. I find something like this, especially in such a small part of Ireland, that it hasn't been picked up before. It hasn't been widely reported. From a personal perspective, something like that follows you around for the rest of your life. That can't be taken away. It's interesting to see, Van Grand's statement that everyone deserves a second chance. We all make mistakes. From a personal perspective, I think you would probably look on someone slightly differently. But it's down to how he performs and how he interacts in the group, how he works day to day. If you found that he wasn't putting it in, then I think your viewpoint would be very, would be shaded. But I think if he's working really hard on a day-to-day basis, and he's good within the group, then you're going to give him a chance. You're going to give him a shot. That would be my view on it. But look, I don't know. I'm not in there day to day, but it is something that does cast a shadow over him for however long he's playing the game.
My biggest concern would be that it sends a pretty bad message to the academy players and to just to teammates. It's like, actually, you know what, we aren't really one of those clubs that's going to have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to drug cheats. That if somebody has tested positive in the past and they've served their ban, even though they confess that so the drug that he was taking was a breast cancer treatment drug, an anabolic steroid to help boost muscles. It's also been proven that you get a long-term benefit from drugs, like beyond just that week. It's like a long-term thing that there's a residual benefit years into the future. So it just makes me really uneasy for like the message that it sends that Munster's culture tolerates this.
Yeah, you're probably right in that perspective. Everyone says a perception is reality. He's a drug user, and he was a drug user in terms of what he did, regardless of the grey area of why or what or how it happened. But yeah, there is that viewpoint. I don't know. I didn't even realise, to be honest, guys. I didn't even realise until 7:15 this morning when I read the article that he. So I'm still I'm still unsure about it, and I think I'm probably going to have that same viewpoint the longer I think about it, and probably more to your perspective, Ger. I do think that in Ireland especially, it's not something that we've been we've been accustomed to. So yeah, it does question that side of it, but then, as I said, it's how he interacts on a day-to-day, how his work ethic is, what's he like within the group, and at the end of the day, the players, people do deserve a second chance to a certain extent. So yeah, it comes down to how his peers see him more so than anything else.
Yeah. Forget
about the wider group. It's about his peers on a day-to-day basis. So my opinion on it, your opinion on it, it doesn't, from his teammates' perspective, doesn't particularly matter. That matters nothing. It's how he interacts with them on a day-to-day basis. The overall perspective, and as you said, from a Munster standpoint, then that does have an issue, and it probably is something that I'm not sure whether it was spoken about. As I said, I didn't know this until this morning, that if it wasn't talked about, it should have been talked about, because it's funny, Padraig Harrington spoke about on Sunday, your brand is your identity. What is your identity? And that brand, to being associated with this, even though it was before he was there, they are associated with it now.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And to be honest, I think certainly we in the media have had a role to play in it not being talked about enough. I think it kind of happened and there was like, oh, that's not a really good idea. And now that he's actually ready to play is why I think it's becoming more prevalent. And the new coach was asked questions about it. And it's not an issue, I made this point a little bit earlier on, it's not an issue of his making. Like, I don't know who exactly signs off on all of the signings, but you would assume that this is a Rassie Erasmus signing, and that somebody in Munster has to have said, yeah, okay. So like the CEO must have a role in saying,
oh yeah, 100%. It's Rassie bring the signing is signed off by the CEO. Everyone's dealings with contract time are with the CEO, based on who you chat with the head coach. They say they're gonna, but like your agent deals in terms of money, bonuses, game things, everything like that. They deal with the CEO. They don't deal with the head coach. Now that might have changed since Rassie came in a DOR perspective.
Yeah, so I know Rassie definitely did a fair few of the contract negotiations, but even with that, like, you'd have to say, look, by the way, this guy has failed a drugs test in the past, and if he didn't, then there was a bad communication issue along the way. But like, I don't know, just feel very uncomfortable with the whole thing, and the fact that Irish rugby is the place that he's going to restore his reputation and move on with his career, as opposed to South African rugby, where this is an issue for them and maybe they should be looking after it. But look, not to get any more bogged down on it, because obviously big matches this weekend, but the other big story coming out of yesterday was Johnny Sexton and his health issue. I just want to play this quick clip because he's obviously become quite annoyed with the way that the story about Johnny Sexton is perpetually about the issue of concussion, his tackle technique, how upright he is. Just have a quick look.
I saw someone get concussed tackling low at the weekend. It's rugby. It's a tough sport. At times, that one I was laid into the space. I expected the guy inside me just to stay straight, and he went in and I had to go in late, and I just got caught unexpected. But there was a lot made of it. I was probably a little bit shook by the initial impact, but I was fine. 10-15 minutes later. I think there was obviously confusion around the HIA. You know, you can pass your HIA but still not return to the pitch, and thus you fail it, and that can be based on how you feel after the initial contact. If even the doctor suspects that you might have had a concussion, even though you pass your HIA, you don't go back out, so then they have to say that you failed your HIA. So it's a hard area, and especially when if people in the media don't fully understand it, that it can lead to a lot of I suppose uncertainty and media coverage. But I was fine the day later I was fine. Just got it in the soft part of my head, and it wasn't even that bad a collision, it was just where I got it.
Yeah, he certainly came across as a bit more annoyed in the written part of the press conference, which happens after that. So at some point we'll stop talking about Johnny Sexton and concussions, Johnny, but probably just not yet.
Well, I think you have to listen to him there. You know, he as he said, he had bad technique. He got caught late. He moved into the space late, and he got caught in the soft part of his head. That's going to lead to a buzzy factor. You're going to be, you know, you're going to get a daze there. You know, you have to remember that, you know, in terms of the medical staffing and the service that Johnny is going to get is going to be better than anyone else. And I think the review process and the HIA process is, you know, it is a very good thing. But as he said there himself, you can pass a HIA, but the doc still thinks you're concussed, you can't go back on. So there is still that grey area around it. But we have to trust in what Johnny says and what the medical staff and Leinster Rugby are saying about this. Because yes, he took a period of time off in terms of when he was in Racing with a head knock, but that was very much precautionary, and he said that himself. The Racing medical side, the Irish medical side, they've all said that. So there comes a stage where we have to see these incidents as isolated incidents that just happen in the game, unfortunately. The game is a contact sport. It's a very, very physical sport. These things are going to happen. Some guys, and at Heineken Cup, at Pro 14, at international level, things happen so quickly that you can just get your foot in the wrong place and it lends yourself just to getting a headbang. I think there is constant reporting around it because he is Johnny Sexton and he's so important to the national side and to Leinster as a whole. So there is a sense that we need to wrap him up in cotton wool. We can't lose him. So we need to make sure that he is 100% okay. But as he says himself, he didn't feel any adverse effects after that initial contact. And, you know, we have to take him at his word.
He talks as well in that clip about his tackle technique and that he saw somebody getting concussed when they tackled low at the weekend. Do you buy that it's just as much of a risk tackling low as it is tackling high?
I think Johnny's tackle technique is based around going after the ball. It's not based around, you know, whether he gets head knocks or whether he doesn't want to tackle low. Johnny can 100% tackle low, but he feels that there's more traction and trying to, you know, when he goes after when he does go high, those times is trying to reef the ball or trying to hold the ball up high or create a choke opportunity. That's just Johnny's mindset. He feels that is something for him that he has in his game, so that's why he does it. He's not doing it because it's a bad technique, a good technique. It's just his thought process around every part of the game would lend itself to how am I going to maximise my opportunity in defence of getting the ball back, because that's what you're doing defensively. Your thought process, get the ball back, and that's probably why he does what he does. I think, as you say, these things just happen in the game, and it's something that it is all the new rules that they brought in, and you know, the HIA, they are moving in the right direction from a concussion perspective. But rugby is a contact sport. All contact sports have a risk factor, and that's the reality of the sport. I'm not playing down anything. Concussion is an issue, and it needs to be addressed and it is being. But these things do happen based on the size, the force of guys, and the speed that the game is played at nowadays.
One last point before we let you go here. Once 2017 ticked into 2018, Simon Zebo was free to commit himself to whatever team he was playing with next season. Racing obviously knew that they had any time that they wanted to announce this, and they've chosen this week before Munster fetch up to Paris to make the announcement. I actually say fair play to them. This is exactly how you do things when you're trying to get a bit of mind games over your opponent the week of a big game. It's not that big a deal, is it, that he's done an interview with Racing 4 days out from the Munster Racing game?
No, I think there actually is something in the French laws that you can't technically announce signings before. I think it's before the 1st of January. I'm unsure, but there is a rule at a timing, because you're not allowed, say, technically poach players, but it happens all the time. But officially you can't actually announce it given a certain day. I remember that when I was talking to a few clubs over there, and I think, look, they probably could have announced it last week if it was the 1st of January, yes, but Simon being Simon, he's just doing an interview. He doesn't particularly care. His mind is going to be on the job this weekend. And he's not one of these guys that, he would be, I can't do media of the week because it's such a big week. That's not his personality, not who he is. He could probably do an interview 2 hours before kickoff and still go out and be man of the match. It doesn't particularly matter, certainly not to Simon, in terms of it being announced officially. We all knew this months ago. It's kind of old news at this stage, so we just get on with it. It's the reality. He's moving to Racing next year and he's going to be a Racing player. I'd
give Munster a really good chance of winning that game this weekend.
It's going to be tough. I think Munster have had in the European Cup, they've been excellent so far. I do think that this is going to be their toughest test by a long way. Racing are going quite well in the top 14. They had a massive win at home against Clermont, 58-6 this weekend. So yeah, it's going to be tough. Munster need to be at their very, very best, and they can't have any 10-15 minute lapses like they have had in games, certainly over the Christmas period, but even in those Leicester games they had a couple of moments, especially in the away game, for that kind of 10-15 minute period where Leicester were on top. They need to make sure that they weather any storm that they have and they keep in the game, keep the scoreboard ticking over, and try and be there at the death. And then I think they might push someone, but they're in a good position in the group. I think they need to look to try and maximise as many points as they can this weekend, and then take it back to Cast at home next week.
Yeah, which hopefully will be a cakewalk. Johnny, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Cheers. Thanks very much for having me, guys.
Johne Murphy giving us some thoughts on the big stories in rugby this week. I don't know, maybe we should have covered this Grobler story in much more detail earlier in the summer, but better late than never.
Probably should have. Maybe a quick Google search would have.
I would definitely read about it, but it was like, okay, well, I mean, is he going to play? Is he that good? Is this just like, is he going to stick around? I don't know. I don't know why we didn't do more. We're doing it now.
Better late than never.
Some fantasy sports documentaries we were asking a little bit earlier on. Kieran Cunningham had a great idea for now that these documentaries are coming thick and fast on the back of the Micko one. Who else would you like to see? We'd said, I said Saipan, Roy Keane, Michelle Smith, Sonia Sullivan.
Blues Brothers. Of course, Conte versus Jose and Keane versus Vieira style, but that was non-Irish, so.
Andy Dunleavy says Wayne McCullough or Steve Collins documentary. Wayne McCullough's story is pretty amazing. Living in Vegas, having the crack. Surely a Robbie Keane doc would be interesting. He's had about 10 different clubs, says Michael Fallon. Yeah, a good proper Robbie Keane documentary that actually explains who Robbie Keane is would be pretty amazing.
Unlikely though. All of these things are unlikely. But there will be a Robbie Keane documentary eventually, but whether or not it'll give us the depth to the character that we want to see is unlikely, I think.
And the Ian McKinley documentary, says Colin McCullough. Yeah, Ian McKinley's story is absolutely remarkable. He was named in the Azuri squad for the forthcoming Six Nations squad. So his story is just brilliant. And yeah, that would definitely be something worth watching. Sam, how you doing, Sam? Sam is the champ's friend. A documentary about CJ Stander going from captaining the baby box and his rise to the Munster team as our archetype project player. Yeah, there is a new archetype project player, which is also mentioned in the newspapers today. An 18 or 19-year-old South African prop has been poached from South Africa to come to Munster to join the academy there, and in 5 years' time he'll be playing for Ireland.
That's the thing, you need to get them while they're a teenager at this point, don't you, for them to be a valuable asset to Ireland's test team.
It has the bang of people smuggling off it though, doesn't it?
Well, it's no, it doesn't, because it's not people smuggling. It is offering somebody a professional contract to come and play rugby.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind when it's like I don't know, just teenagers.
Teenagers move football clubs from different continents all the time.
All right.
They're very successful. He will love Ireland. He'll be singing Aaron Levine in Croke, or I was going to say Croke Park, in
Croker, yeah,
in the Aviva Stadium in a couple of years' time.
Stevie Ford says, stop talking about them and start making them. Even if you tried a few radio ones, that'd be great. Yeah, we will try and make some documentaries for you. But we're talking about like a proper. I think the budget for a 30 for 30 is like between $500,000 and $1 million. That would make you a good Roy Keane Saipan documentary.
Probably would, yeah. Probably. I wonder who's going to fund that. We should crowdfund that. We should get a crowdfunding going to make a Saipan documentary going. Let's make it our project. Let's make it.
Kickstarter for a Saipan off the wall documentary.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. This is the best idea that Owen's ever had.
I know. Thank you.
Like as Jack Charlton said to Alan McLaughlin after the equaliser, you've justified your existence there, son.
I'm just delighted that I'm going to leave now, I suppose.
All right, see you
later.
It's all done. No, there's one good story you want to tell us about Jaylen Brown on the back of the Guardian sports papers today.
Yeah, if you have picked up a copy of the Guardian, you'll be able to read it on the back of it, or it's up on their website. It was actually released yesterday afternoon. It's a really good piece. I actually didn't really know much about Jaylen Brown. I don't think many people over here do know much. He's only in his second year in the NBA, was drafted last year after a year in college, was a pretty promising rookie. Last year did all right in the playoffs when I was watching him. This year he's gone to another level, so people actually know a bit more about him. But he certainly kind of stormed onto my radar after his performance against Golden State Warriors earlier in the season. I think he scored 24 points in that game. It was a career high performance scoring-wise. But what was impressive about it was that his best friend had died by suicide earlier that day. He was told by his friend's mother, said he didn't feel right, didn't want to play, and then got a second call off his mother and was like, no, you have to play, you have to do it for him. Goes out and puts in his best ever performance in the NBA. So it shows what this guy's made of. But it turns out this guy's got a hell of a lot more depth to him than you might expect. During his 1 year in college, he became fluent in Spanish. He learned Arabic. Well, he didn't learn Arabic. He learned the Arabic alphabet. He's written some unbelievable papers in terms of racism in America and subtle racism in terms of people fulfilling a role within American society. So he makes the point to Donald McRae in this article that there will always be a cohort of people that will need to work in McDonald's. There will always need to be the rich people. There will always need to be enough people to fill up the jails. And that is the subtle racism that pervades American society right now, and that he feels is not going to change anytime soon. He's got quite a negative outlook. He gives the old lines about, Donald Trump enabling racism and stuff, but it's not just that. There is depth to what he's saying. It's not throwaway lines. Talks about Colin Kaepernick as well, and how he just thanks him for what he's done, and he's not surprised whatsoever. And it kind of gets you thinking again about the divide between the NBA and the NFL in America, and the minds that are existing in the NBA versus the minds that are potentially compressed in the NFL and aren't able to talk out. I'm not going to say they don't have the courage to talk out, because it takes not even just courage, it takes miles beyond courage to do what Colin Kaepernick did and get blackballed in the way he has been.
Remember as well, for Kaepernick it was actually a bit easier than it would be for a bunch of other players who are not as wealthy as him, because he was a quarterback and because he'd had at least one big contract. He had some financial stability in his life. Now, that's not to diminish in any way what he did. He's an absolute hero and has really kickstarted a massive movement. But if you're a rookie running back, and there was a rookie running back who actually who was part of the Houston team, who protested, and he was dropped for the next game. Was like a healthy scratch the next week out. So like, there's no guarantee he's ever going to get back in the team. Like, and that's the level of where this guy is 21, and because the NBA actually is a far more self-confident body of players and far more expressive and has, it seems, better owners. These guys are all happy to come out and speak and tell the truth about what's happening. So, unbelievable story.
Yeah, it's important to point out as well, though, that the self-confident players is a very important thing. To a certain extent, the owners are, but he does mention the unnamed NBA executive. It was quite a big story last year before he was drafted that Jaylen Brown might be too smart for his own good, which is exactly what you think it means. He talks about it here, and one of the quotes is, it was hinting at something very problematic within society. It bothered me, but I was focused on getting where I was going, so I never dissected it or pointed it out to anybody. But I disagree that an athlete can't be intelligent. Some people think that in basketball we have a bunch of masculine adults who don't know how to control themselves. They're feeble-minded or can't engage or articulate ideas. That's a narrative they're trying to paint. We're trying to change it because that statement definitely has a racist undertone. It's
100%.
not, like it's not just the thing that people who play sports are stupid. It is this whole idea of black athletes and how they are described.
Yeah, it's a brilliant piece, and it would definitely make you root for him and for the Celtics for the rest of the season. Like a 21-year-old so self-possessed and so articulate is brilliant, regardless of whatever the messages are that are coming out from that. A couple of things to tell you about. Michael Rasmussen was on Off the Ball last night. 45 minutes, definitely worth your time getting your hands on that podcast. You can get it on offtheball.com on our podcast section, or we're now on Stitcher if you want to get your podcast there. Tune in, Podcasts Addict, Podcasts app, whatever, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast network for the bunch of podcasts that are there. Just to go back to the Gerbrand Grobler, he's the Munster second row, the South African who tested positive for a breast cancer drug, which is an anabolic steroid, and served a 2-year ban, fessed up to it and didn't have a hearing into his drug taking. We were talking about this a little bit earlier on because he's now fit and is ready to play for Munster again. It's in the story, it's in the newspapers today, so that's why we're talking about it. In sports, says Neil Keegan, it should be a one strike, read drugs, especially contact sports. He took it with malice, intent and forethought. The lad should be banned and not welcome to Munster. They're saying that it's okay to be caught once. Whether you like it or not, that's what Munster are saying. You get caught, you serve your ban, we move on.
Definitely. But at the same time, if this was somebody who had done it accidentally, or so, let's just make up a fictitious player that is a second row that just signed. Because I don't want to pick out anybody because it doesn't need to be based in fact.
Owen Sheehan, 22-year-old.
I just signed for Munster. I've just been banned for a year, and I've said it's accidental. And it definitely wasn't accidental what I did it deliberately, but I'm saying it's accidental. I didn't fess up in the way that Grobler admittedly was forced to fess up. There was no grey area here. He had to. I'm just thinking, like, when you're giving when you're whitewashing everything, you're giving everybody a lifelong ban, and you're tarring this guy who clearly did it with malice, as this listener says, and comparing that with somebody who claims the old accidental innocence thing, despite the fact that he's not innocent at all. He's not doing it in an accidental way. I did it with malice. I didn't do it as an accident. That I just think the people who fess up to doping, if they can contribute some way to eradicating this, but well, let's
prove that. But why are you proving it on our time? Why are you proving it on Irish Rugby's time?
Yeah, that's the thing. It does seem a very strange move. I would love to hear Rassie Erasmus's take on this, because Grobler, he is South African, isn't he?
Yeah.
I know it's me saying that every South African signing by Munster that they've made is something to do with Rassie Erasmus, but he has the inside information on that country as a rugby nation.
Rassie handled the contract negotiation. Certainly speaking to one agent about his dealings with Munster, about one of his players, he said that Rassie was the guy that he dealt with on contract. So you would expect that Rassie would have been the person dealing with the contract for this. And I can see, as the director of rugby in South Africa, that it's great to have a young South African out there re-establishing himself in the rugby world at a really high-profile club like Munster. So I can see from his new perspective how that makes sense, and maybe even from the Munster perspective when it's just your job to win in the now, but when your job is to protect the brand of Munster and of Irish rugby, which maybe that wasn't Rassie's remit at the time, then somebody should have said, this guy tested positive for what did he do? No, you can't have him. Get somebody else. The world's a big place. Get somebody else.
There's plenty of other potential Springboks in the second row that you could have signed. Yeah, certainly if I'm looking at that and I'm thinking of taking something, I'm definitely making it look like an accident. If I get caught, it was in my protein shake. It shouldn't have been there. It was a contaminated substance.
Yeah. But no one ever believes that is the problem.
No one ever believes that.
Why would I do that?
You can get away with it a hell of a lot more than people like this might. Of course, he has got away with it essentially because he's playing for a professional rugby outfit.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that the scrutiny on this guy is going to be a lot more than it will be on anybody who trots out the accidental line.
As a Munster fan, I'm disappointed, says Shelley on Periscope. You're either anti-doping or you're not. It sends the wrong message. Tom Coleman at Leinster Royalty. OTB a bit late to the party on this one, but interesting conversation nonetheless. Thanks, Tom, for that one. Paul Conlon says a bad signing for Munster, pardon me, knowingly cheated and was banned. It ruins the ethos of Munster and sport. It's definitely not good for the ethos of I think Irish rugby. I think actually Irish rugby is damaged by having somebody like this in our squads. And then Peter O'Neill, who signs himself at P O'Neill, make of that what you will, says, at Off the Ball, many lads in and around 18 or 19 are willing to take PEDs because of the short nature of the bans that are imposed. Furthermore, they will rarely be tested at club level. Speaking from my own experience, it's pretty common among club players. Hashtag OTB AM.
I'm also taking the gamble on the 3 to 10 half-life of this drug. If I'm looking to take drugs right now, definitely taking the gamble.
And 10 days.
3 to 10 days, so it could be out of your system by the time the testers test you after the next match.
Take it in the summer, build up your muscles, and then don't take it again until the following summer.
Exactly. Accelerate that gym program, make pre-season more productive for you. Yeah,
okay, so that's been a depressing mornings Off the Ball AM with you. It hasn't really. There's been loads of amazing stories. The stuff about athletes finding their voices is certainly something that we'll come back to on the show. Tomorrow morning is Thursday. It is a massive weekend of Champions Cup action coming your way. We'll bring you some previews on that, and we'll also bring you some dynamite from the world of GAA and college football. 53. Sorry, 53. I keep giving you the number to text. Don't text the number unless it's between the hours of 7 and 10 at night if you want to leave a comment about sport. But as ever, you can get us at Off the Ball on Twitter, facebook.com/Off the Ball. Owen is off to set up his Kickstarter, and we're going to bring you that Saipan doc if it kills us. Probably going to kill us.
Probably will.